Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why learning a completely new skill, like driving a new car or using a new tool, can feel so incredibly tough at first? A lot of the time, when scientists study how we learn new movements, they focus on something called adaptation. Think about when you step into a car with a slightly different steering feel. Your brain quickly adjusts, tweaking your existing driving controls to compensate. That is adaptation. But what happens when the new control is totally unfamiliar? What if you have to learn a completely new way to move something, where the old rules just don't apply? This new research dives into that really puzzling challenge, the Novo motor learning. So the big question here is about learning something totally new from scratch, not just fine-tuning what we already know. The traditional way we've studied motor learning has been by looking at adaptation, where our motor system adjusts to small changes in how things work. For example, if a robot arm suddenly feels heavier, we adapt to the new weight. In these cases, we assume the basic controller, or the system that controls our movements, is already there, and we just tweak its settings. But what if that controller architecture isn't there yet? What if we have to build it from the ground up? The paper points out that most of our understanding of motor learning comes from experiments where we introduce a perturbation. Imagine you are moving a cursor on a screen, and suddenly the cursor moves in the opposite direction of your hand. You'll likely adapt to this quickly. This kind of learning is explained by models where we just adjust the parameters, like the sensitivity or gain of an existing control system. The structure of the controller stays the same, only its internal settings get tuned. But the researchers argue not all motor learning fits this picture. There are tasks where learners have to figure out entirely new relationships between what they intend to do, what their senses tell them, and the actions they take. These de novo learning tasks can be slow, sometimes confusing, and the way we learn might not transfer perfectly to slightly different situations. People might struggle to get it right, show inconsistent progress, and depend heavily on specific practice conditions. These kinds of learning patterns are hard to explain if we just think of it as tweaking existing controls. So this new paper proposes a different way to think about it. Instead of just adaptation, they suggest de novo motor learning is more like controller synthesis. This means we're not just tuning an existing controller, but actually building and stabilizing new control memories. These memories are like specialized toolkits for specific situations. They figure out which information is important, how to process it, how to turn your thoughts into actions, and when to use that specific toolkit. When we encounter a totally new task, the system might be unsure about the best way to build these control memories. This uncertainty, the researchers suggest, could explain why learning is slow and sometimes unreliable. It's not that our learning mechanism is slow, but rather that the process of figuring out the correct structure of the controller itself takes time. Now, this idea of controller synthesis builds on other theories. They mention perceptual control theory, which suggests that behavior can be organized by continuous feedback loops without needing constant parameter learning. They also connect to structure learning, where we figure out underlying patterns across different tasks, and they talk about contextual inference, which is about how our brain uses cues to decide which learned skill or memory to use. But the key idea that this paper brings is this concept of plant state addressed retrieval. Imagine your body and the thing you are controlling as a plant. The plant state is basically the current condition of your body and the environment you are interacting with. Instead of just recalling a memory based on a simple label like red button or task A, the system retrieves a controller memory based on the actual state of the plant. So, if your hand is in a certain position or moving in a specific way, that specific plant state triggers the right controller memory. This is a critical difference. It means that the retrieval of a control strategy is deeply tied to the physical reality of the situation, not just abstract labels. So, let's dive a bit deeper into what they mean by controller memory. They describe it as a functional unit for control. First, there is the plant state domain profile. This is like the address, or the specific plant states where this memory is useful. Then there is the input embedding, which is how this memory takes in relevant signals. The observer estimates the current state, and the evaluator figures out if there is an error or progress. The controller motif is the actual computation that generates a movement command. The output mapping translates this internal command into actual motor actions. And finally, the gate determines when this memory is actually used. The exciting part is that during de novo learning, not only can the parameters within these components be tuned, but the components themselves, the domain, the embedding, the observer, the evaluator, the motif, the output mapping, and the gate can be formed, recruited, or reconfigured. This is where synthesis really happens. For example, if you are learning to use a new robotic arm, your brain might have to figure out what new sensory signals are important. Input embedding, how to estimate the arm's position, observer, what constitutes a good or bad movement evaluator, how to translate internal motor plans into arm movements, output mapping, and when to use this new arm control strategy gate. When the system encounters a situation that doesn't have a good match in its existing controller memories, it doesn't just throw up its hands. Instead, it enters a phase of exploration and synthesis. Based on performance feedback, it can start to cobble together new combinations of these components. It might recruit an existing observer process from another skill or adapt a known controller motif to the new task. Through trial and error, and guided by performance signals, a new controller memory is gradually formed and associated with the specific plant state region where it is useful. Once this new memory is stable, then later learning within that memory can happen through adaptation, like tuning parameters. This explains some of the odd behaviors we see in de novo learning. Slow acquisition, that is the time it takes to build the controller memory structure. Limited generalization, that is because the new situation might not perfectly match the plant state domain of the synthesized memory, or it might trigger the wrong memory, context dependence. That makes sense if the available situation strongly influences which memory is retrieved or how it is gated. Figure 1 perfectly captures this. Panel B shows a situation where no adequate controller memory is available for a new task. We need to synthesize one in panel C. This synthesized memory, once formed, then allows for adaptation as shown in panel A, where existing memories are tuned. The paper suggests ways to test this idea empirically. They argue that just looking at how fast someone learns isn't enough, especially in de novo tasks. We need to look at transfer, how well the learning applies to new related tasks. If transfer patterns are more related to the overlap in the underlying controller, memory structure than just surface similarities like the visual appearance or the geometry of the movement, then that supports the synthesis idea. For example, if you learn a new hand movement to cursor mapping, and then a similar task that requires a slightly different mapping succeeds better if it reuses the same internal processing components, like how position is estimated or how commands are mapped to action, rather than just looking visually similar to the first task. That would be strong evidence for controller synthesis. The researchers also highlight that learning